and everyone present to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, Overview Scrutiny Board Crime and Disorder Committee meeting. Board members and officers, please remember to switch microphones on when speaking, speak directly into the microphone, and switch microphones off when finished. Please switch mobile phones off or place on silent. This meeting is being live streamed to the public. Members of the public present are entitled to take photos, film, audio record, and report on the business held in public must not act in a disruptive manner. If they do so, they may be asked to leave. That also includes members sitting here as well. This is the annual meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Board, Crime and Disorder Committee. And this committee has the responsibility for the review and scrutiny of the decisions and actions taken by the Community Safety Partnership in connection with the discharge of its crime and disorder functions. I propose to take the order of the business as stated on the agenda. So first, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we have received apologies from Councillor Gillian Fry. We have Councillor Keynes sobbing for her. Apologies received from Mark Fowler and Dave Taylor, Chair.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, Alia Khan. Yeah, she's not feeling well.
Okay, noted.
Okay, thank you. You have the minutes of the meeting last year on the 5th of March, 2025. Do you all approve of them? Take that as a yes. Thank you. Do we have any CSP chairs announcements? Okay. Does anyone have any disclosure of interest?
None at this point, Chair.
Okay, thank you. No
urgent business and no references from other committees, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We now move over to agenda item 7, which is the policing plan presented by the Police Commissioner, John Tizard.
And it's great to be here. Doesn't seem a year ago that I was here last. So much has happened in that year. I think I've got some slides if they could be shown, please. While the slides are being arranged, what I thought I would do this evening is do an overview of what's been achieved against the policing crime plan over the last year, and to set out some of the agenda that I have for the next 2 years. And many of you will know that the government, in its wisdom, has decided to abolish police and crime commissioners with effect from May 2028. So that would have coincided with the election had there still been police and crime commissioners. But what I would say is I intend, as does Umi, my deputy, we intend to continue to work throughout those 2 years. There's a lot more to be done. We're not now, handing up our bat ready for the close of play in 2 years' time. I think I'm going to make the presentation, but Umi, as my deputy, leads on protecting women and children and supporting victims. And if there are any questions, particularly questions I can't answer, I shall hand them to Umi. And if there are operational questions, I've got superintendent and a chief inspector here who can deal with operational policing, because that's not my role. Just to remind us that my role as Police and Crime Commissioner is to be the voice of the public into the police, not the police's voice into the public. My role is strategic, to set the plan, to set the budget, consequently the council tax, and then to hold the Chief Constable to account for delivering an efficient and effective police service against that plan and against the wider police objectives and government objectives for policing. I also have the role of coordinating the wider criminal justice system and through the chairing of the Criminal Justice Board for Bedfordshire, and happy to talk more about that. I think talking to Luton Council is always a pleasure and a privilege, because you share so much, we share so much in common. Your commitment to 2040, your social justice program to make, one town fair for all, I would reflect that. Many voices across Bedfordshire, one county, fair for all. And I just want to draw your attention to the triangle on this slide. I've increasingly, over the last 2 years, come to realise that criminal justice, really important, upholding the law, but doing that in a fair and just way. But you need to counter that by social justice, because the relationship between poverty, poor education, and I was having a really good conversation with your Strategic Director of Children's Services prior to this meeting about the excellent work the borough is doing in terms of reducing school exclusions, because we know the correlation between school exclusion, crime, and imprisonment is very strong, and good employment opportunities. So, but the third element of that triangle is human rights, and I believe if you take one side of the triangle away, the triangle collapses. So, everything I'm going to talk about today is in the framework of that sort of approach to. We have the next slide, please. Do it. And it's been an interesting year. Interesting 2 years, but particularly over the last 2 year. And I'm not going to go into all the details. You can read the slides as well as I can. But we've had a really effective summer of safer streets in the town centre, and a great credit to your officers, particularly your enforcement teams, but also to Chris Simmons and the community police team in Luton. And what we saw was a really good sense of collaboration and cooperation between the council and the police. And I should probably say, this is probably recorded, it's not going out, because I think it's soccer bucko. If only that were the case to the same degree in the other parts of the county, we would be a lot better off. We've also secured additional money last year for neighbourhood policing. We had £1.8 million. We will have 16 additional officers in the coming year, but they'll be redeployed from other parts of the police service because we've had no additional money. In fact, we've had an overall net decrease in real terms in our funding. And then we move through to the violence exploitation and prevention partnership, the renaming, refocusing of the VERU. And again, I can take credit for that, but actually it sits in my office. I'm the accountable person for the VERU to the Home Office that fund it, but actually it's a partnership working, and Dave Collins and others sit on its board. And again, very strong working relationships. We launched a innovation fund to support voluntary and charitable community organisations, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, because I'm really keen on getting the community involved. If we're going to really tackle crime, you need community level organisations, and often community organisations actually know about what's going on in neighbourhoods and far better than any of us do. And I was reflecting the first time, Mark's not here, but the first time I met Mark Fowler, some 20 plus years ago, that's what we were talking about then, and that agenda holds today as well. And we commissioned an opinion poll to look at public confidence in policing and what were the key issues for the public in terms of policing. 3 key highlights from that. Some 62% of the population, and this was undertaken by War in Common, which was a national opinion poll organisation. So it was representative, ethnic diversity, gender, socioeconomic, and geography across the county. 62% of the population have confidence in either strong or less strong confidence, which is about the par with the national position. But for me, the worry there is it means 40% don't have that confidence. How do we build that trust and that confidence? And we don't just do it by saying we're great people, come and have trust and confidence here. We do it by actions, I would suggest. What was really interesting in terms of that, the group that had the greatest trust were males under 25 from non-white communities. And that was a bit of, that was a positive finding. The group that had the least trust were people like myself over a certain age, white, male, living in central Bedfordshire. So across, again, you might not have expected that in terms of that. And the issues that came out, fear of safety, particularly females out in the community, in the public realm, that fits in with the work in terms of what we've been doing in the summer, but also wanting to see more prevention and tackling serious crime, as well as areas like antisocial behaviour. And I'm very pleased to say over the last year, antisocial behaviour has fallen quite significantly, and Superintendent Steen can talk more to that than I can. And Bedfordshire leads the way on the use of AI in policing. And I was very keen that we set up, that we were clear about the ethics of the use of AI, whether it's in local live facial recognition or the remarkable work that's done in improving productivity and supporting solving crimes and similar. So we've established a ethics advisory panel, which will advise me and through me, the Chief Constable, on the ethics of using AI. And we've also enhanced the complaint system for policing, and I brought what was the law says model 2, that won't tell you anything, but the initial area complaints were originally handled and had traditionally been handled in Bedfordshire for the last few years within the police service. I thought it would be better, more independence if they came part of my office, and we had a dedicated team working on that. They don't deal with serious complaints that will go to the professional standards department or to the independent office for police conduct. And we are looking at how we can improve governance across the whole county, because officers of this authority will spend many, many hours in meetings looking at cross-sector issues and governance. Officers from the police service too, and other agencies, and we've all agreed to review that, and I'm sponsoring that and have commissioned the work to look at how we might make that governance more effective and efficient, not least because all of us have got tight budgets, haven't we? If we move on to the next slide. So that's sort of an overview of what's happened in 24-26. Just in terms of some of the missions, and I have, as you'll recall when I've spoken before, 6, 7 missions that are sort of breaking down the policy areas. You'll see, and I'm not going to read this slide, there have been significant improvements in police performance in the last year. I will take the strategic responsibility for that, but actually it's guys like Chris and Tom and their colleagues who have actually done the work. We've got some more work to do in terms of responding to incidents on 999 calls. We're answering the phone very effectively. There are over 92, 94% now in 10 seconds. We don't always get there in the 15 minutes. And that's across the county. So it's not more in the urban or the non-urban areas, and more work needs to be done on that. And you'll see some success in terms of reducing the ASB and improving performance. And I could happy to take questions on that. And for me, perhaps the most important mission is prevention. Because if we can prevent crime, there's a benefit to society. There's a benefit for the person who might have been the victim of crime, and there actually been someone may not have committed the crime, and therefore they don't get caught up in the criminal justice system. And it saves all of us a lot of money. The police, local authorities, the wider system. So again, not going to go into all the detail because you can read the slide as well as I can. But I think, some of that work in prevention has to be partnership working. The police, we do some remarkable work on prevention. all parts of the police service, but particularly the community and neighbourhood teams and problem solving. But it requires local authority, it requires the health service, it requires schools, it requires a whole range of partners. And above all, it requires all of us as citizens and residents to contribute to reducing crime and making the conditions right that we don't have those kinds of crimes. I go back to the point I made about school exclusion and the remarkable work that you're doing as a council to reduce it. But often our interventions are when a young person or a child is on the verge of being excluded. Why aren't we going back to understand what trauma they may have been affected, because there may have been domestic abuse in the family, there may be other problems, and how do we then start stopping the next generation coming through? And we could repeat that for a whole raft, you know, as well as the obvious things about prevention, making sure people lock their doors and have appropriate security. We could move on. Reinvigorating local policing. Lovely word, isn't it? Reinvigorating. But actually, this is about how do we make, we know, and again, it came through in our polling, the public want to see more visible policing on the street in communities. And that's important, but I would say we've got an incredible local police team, but they're supported by some specialist teams who are not on the streets. You know, 50% of crime will be cyber, and you don't normally deal with cyber crime being out on the street. But we've got more engagement with increased numbers of officers. I'd like to see more in our neighbourhood teams. We've also, I think, again, that local policing that is working in partnership. Again, what we saw in the summer, that joint working between the council enforcement team. There were days when policing was actually being led by the council enforcement teams, which I think, you know, it's a real positive for what we've achieved. And, you know, part of my role here is to hold the chief to account for delivering effective, and I have a real key focus on local policing. And local policing is not a soft part of policing, far from it. It's a great source of intelligence, it's a source of enforcement, carrying through warrants, and similarly. But it's really important, you know, and good community police officers working with their partners are actually picking up and understanding what's going on in neighbourhoods. So we can move on to the next slide. Putting victims at the heart of the criminal justice system. And this is an area that Umi leads on with me and advises and supports me on. Victims experience really bad service often. From the moment they report a crime, whether they do it through 999, 101 online, through to, if they are lucky, to get to the court. You know, we have a system where Luton Crown Court is now booking cases in the end of 2027. So, you know, there are significant issues there, but how do we support victims throughout that journey? And we are undertaking a review of all the services, both the support services for victims, but the way, in fact, the system treats victims. And again, that needs to be a system-wide approach. And again, you know, setting up, and this is a piece of work that Umi is taking a particular interest in and lead, and she can answer any questions on, having a trauma-informed approach to supporting victims and making sure we've got the specialist services. And clearly through my office, we support a whole range of voluntary organisations and not-for-profit organisations that support victims. And we get some funding from the Ministry of Justice for that. And we also use some of our police budget for it as well. So again, I think real opportunities to do more work in collaboration with the council. And we're looking at co-commissioning. And again, you do work in this space as well. And many of the people who are victims will also be users of your services and being part of your programme. We could move on, please. Serious crime. Wherever we were in the country, not tackling serious crime, you couldn't avoid it in a police plan. However, Bedfordshire has a disproportionate level of serious crime compared with anywhere else in the region and probably nationally as well, relative to the type of county we are. And again, going to some areas here, But so much of that is drug related. And again, my colleagues from the police can talk much more about that. You know, when someone complains to me there's antisocial behaviour on the street, there's some dealing, or, you know, there's some young people, maybe not so young people, why do worse but young people, you know, taking drugs in the park or whatever. There will be a chain behind that will probably lead to organised gangs, crime, and may well lead to somewhere outside the UK. So there's it's that whole connection. You know, much of retail crime will be retail crime for people taking goods to fuel their habit. We know the issues of antisocial behaviour, often in town centres and elsewhere, there will be a drug or alcohol abuse element to it. Police can't deal with that. Public health and other agencies have a role to play in that. So again, that partnership working. And we have a 10-year drug strategy. And we jointly fund a coordinator. And it's great that we've had some money from the Borough Council towards Kira's role. And that's important too, working across, again, the agencies. And she sits physically in your public health team here, but works across the county. And, you know, preventing knife crime and exploitation. I was watching a very powerful film yesterday called Lost Boys, of experience of a young adolescent, a school child, in fact, who, you know, became the victim of grooming county lines, ended up committing a murder. And he was fictitious, but those stories are not untrue, and now he's going to spend 20 plus years in jail. And we have a lot of county lines activity. You know, Bedfordshire exports county lines, one of the few non-major conurbations that exports county lines. I think we've got something like 70 currently. I mean, the number varies, but that's sort of order. And they're not all in the urban areas, they're also in the rural parts of the county too. I think that's important. But that knife crime, and knife crime not just about, we always say how easy it is to talk about knife crime and you talk about teenagers. Actually, knife crime and some of the most vicious knife crime and homicides and others are committed by older people with knives. And again, it's that a multi-agency approach. It was fantastic to see the knife angel here earlier in the year, last year. And I think all that is part about how we raise the profile. But rest assured, you know, there's a real solid piece of policing going on, dealing with organised crime. And through our regional organised crime unit, working with the NCA and others on international crime. And there's a strong, and again, we probably have a disproportionate amount of some of that here. It will be partly our location, our proximity to London, but also having an international airport as well, which is a great asset. Let me say, I'm not being negative about that, but with more flights to the Balkans than I think any other airport in the country. Then moving on, if we may, conscious of time, protecting women and children, commonly called the VORG agenda, or MVORG, as Bedfordshire Police recognise it, because they recognise that most of this is committed by males. We widened it to protecting women and children to embrace child safeguarding and the joint work we do with the Children's Services Department here and the other two boroughs of the Health Service. But we know, again, and the polling showed us, that women in particular feel unsafe, particularly older women. So we need to get domestic abuse. The biggest volume crime in the county is domestic abuse related. And we know the impact that has on children, going back to the school exclusions and trauma. So all this is really important. And we're looking, you know, my ambition, I'll probably get shot from behind me now, is to have a single MASH for the county. But what we really need to have is much better data sharing. Even if we don't have I was having a good time with your director of Children's Services today. But actually it's about how we get better, because actually we work with the same children and how we get better data sharing. And we've got a pilot in Bedford where we're looking at using AI technology to expedite that, and we'll see how that goes. But it's also about really tackling having a zero tolerance to misogyny. Because how often do I get really worried when someone says to me, well, the problem is the woman shouldn't go in the street, or she shouldn't go down that alleyway, or she should be much more careful when she goes out for a drink. Actually, yes, of course, we all need to be aware of where we are and what's around us. But actually, it's the men who are causing that crime that are the real villains, and we need to tackle them. And we need to change behaviours. And we who are male just need to think about our behaviours and our language and call out others who are not performing in the right way. Because, you know, again, that's where we're going to prevent and give women much more confidence. And, you know, I could again talk more if you want to about this area, and Umi can talk about it in much greater detail than I can. It would have the next slide. And the final mission area is about excellence in policing. And I've talked about the public confidence. I've enhanced the governance arrangements for the last year, and we will be having an inspection by His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, Fire and Rescue Services starting, well, they start actually inspecting the custody services next Monday. And it's a bit like the offset that you have been through, but for the whole for policing. And we've enhanced things like the use of scrutiny panels to on stop and search and use of force. And again, I could go into more details if you wish to on that one. But again, I think it's about, for me, an excellent police service is one that gets a good report from the inspectorate. More importantly, it's one where the public have greater trust. And they're seen to resolve in the public's trust. Please note, my final two slides, and I'll be very quick on this, Chair, because I've probably taken more than my allocated time. So your director, your Marek did say to me, if you could talk all the time, I won't need to. You see, so it's all part of it. We've got a little arrangement together now, seriously. I talked about the grassroots innovation funds. I was very conscious. A lot of the 2.5 million, just under £3 million that my office spends on grants and supports to voluntary organisations and others, particularly in the area of protecting victims, we're very much focused on big organisations, and we had big contracts, you know, and you had to be able to review the whole county, and you had to have a track record and the rest of it. But we know there's a huge amount of work that's going on in local areas. So we set about £200,000 out of the Community Safety Fund, which is the element I have total control over, because some of that, the money that comes from the government, there are restrictions. And across the county, we've had 42 projects. We were overwhelmed. We could have funded more had we had more money, maximum of £5,000. And 17 of those were in Luton. I'm going to look at that slide again when I present it elsewhere. That's a high proportion of 42. But and about just over £80,000. But there's some really interesting, innovative work going on. And Eva and I have been visiting some of those projects in the last few weeks, and again, I think there's opportunity to look at some of the work you do and some co-commissioning with the council. And then my very final slide, you know, also we have wider grant funding, and you know, there's some examples of there. You know, we make a contribution towards Dave Collins's local youth partnership service. It should be, shouldn't it? I don't know who put the slide together, got the wrong words. Apologies, Dave. But and that's in work that they do in custody in particular, and constantly they'll be involved in the inspection. We funded, jointly funded with the council, some additional funding for the Luton Council of Faiths for the work they're doing and in this time of, you know, quite serious concern and anxiety in communities. And I think just on that point, and I haven't mentioned it before, and that's when I'll finish, is that I know in Luton, as in other parts of the county and other parts of the country at the moment, many communities are feeling very vulnerable and very unsafe. You know, and we've had attacks on mosques, we've had attacks on synagogues in the last period. And who knows what may come of what's happened in the last 72 hours internationally. And I can look at statistics with my police colleagues and we can say, well, you know, there's not any intelligence on what's going on. We can look at, you know, hate crime numbers, and all those are important. But jointly, I think we have to make sure we are giving protection and reassurance to communities. And it's been a privilege I'm sad we have to do it, to be part of the joint committee that the council organised with faith organisations and others. And I think that's again another really good example of partnership working. So in conclusion, I hope I've given an overview of what I've achieved and what colleagues have achieved over the last year since I was last here. But ultimately, my message is we serve the same communities, the same people. We have a common agenda. It's one town, fair for all, and I want to be part of that. And it's it's great to be here. More than happy to take questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you raise your hands if you want to ask a question? Lee, Councillor Khan, Steve, Nigel. Yep, I'm coming around. Councillor Begum. Okay, have I missed anyone?
No.
Okay, let's start from, so whilst we are asking questions, can we please ensure that these are direct and concisely put questions, and they're not mixed in with comments or large briefs. We have started this meeting half an hour earlier than usual. So if you can keep nice and consistent so that everybody has a chance to ask the questions. So we start with Lee.
Chair, if I could just interject, thank you for that. Can I also say, please don't raise individual cases or individual people. If you want to talk about those, talk to one of us at the end of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for an in-depth report. There's lots of verbiage there, but I don't see much in the way or anything in the way of obviously data, metrics, KPIs, and obviously this plan has been in place since I think 2024. So how is success going to be judged, and what data and trends are being observed at the moment?
I could have presented reams of data. If you go to the website for the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, you will see lots of data. You will see the minutes of the performance and governance meetings, which I hold monthly, where I hold the Chief Constable to account, and we go through a lot of data and performance there. The highlights would be less crimes are being reported, more crimes are being solved, antisocial behaviour is down by 14%. I think those are three very key statistics for the last year, and we could go into more granularity if you wanted to. But we could spend the whole evening on data. And there was one slide where I showed some of those sort of highlights. There are areas where crime is increasing, and clearly, we need to tackle that as well.
Thank you. If I may, just one more question. It's kind of linked to it, and it's probably quite an important bit of data. But how is victim satisfaction and time to justice sort of tracked and improved?
Well, victim satisfaction, there are a whole raft of surveys and consultations that take place with victims. We talk clearly to organisations that represent victims, and that's not just female women victims and women's organisations, but others too. We also fund the Bedfordshire Victim Support Service, which sits with the police, and clearly they have a lot of statistics too, and I would encourage any victim to seek their advice and report to them as well. We also picked up some of that in the polling. In terms of how we improve the journey, some of that's not within, not within our remit, because some of it is the court service, some of it is the Crown Prosecution Service, some of it is other parts of the system. And part of my role is, and I badger, and I'm trying to find ways which we, having those conversations to make that improvement. And clearly there's a role to central government as well. Part of the challenge in Bedfordshire is we don't have enough court space. If there were more court space with more resources, the system could speed up quite dramatically. So that's an area, you know, maybe the courts could work different hours. But so you know, sorry. But we can add to that.
Yeah, so you make a good point about victim satisfaction, and policing as a whole, sort of nationally, has not been victim focused until recent years. So it's only recently, and I want to say maybe 2 years ago, that within Beds Police, they implemented a victims tactical lead, a detective inspector that's focusing specifically on victims, the approach across the whole of policing, and ensuring that police are not just perpetrator focused, not just catching the bad guys, but how they can support victims, so victims feel confident in reporting. And in areas like domestic violence, that's really important. So NASH has been looking at something called the Victims Code of Conduct, which is national guidance, and it has lots of different rights towards it, and looking at how good the police are at following those rights, including stuff around children and how children can be victims. And there's a lot of training and development going on with police officers around that. Again, that is in its infancy. Unfortunately, it's in its infancy because the national sort of focus and picture on victims hasn't always been there in policing, whereas it should always be victim first. And I think they're making really good progress. It takes a bit of time. There are some surveys that the police have done, that Nash and her team have done, that you can find some data on. If you look at those P&G, performance and governance data that John mentioned on the website, there'll be a little bit there as well. The other thing around victims is, as John mentioned, the review in his slides, that because we know that victims don't just come to the police, there's a massive amount of victims that never go to the police, that will only ever interact with, you know, statutory services, but that aren't police, or, you know, the housing teams or schools or things like that. That needs to be reflected so people have faith. And then obviously the criminal justice system, which I don't even need to go into because we all know what the issue is there. And John's role, again, on the criminal justice board, that's bringing all those partners together to hold them to account. But that review is going to be looking at every single aspect of the journey that a victim has, from start to end, different victim crime types and different things. So that's going to take a bit of time, but we've really invested into that because we think that the findings from that can make quite a bit of difference. And finally, we can't always use data and we have lots of reams of data where we've held the police to account. But when it comes to victim services, some of the things that John has mentioned around grant funding, around looking at who we're supporting and the budget we have for victim support services, massive chunk of that is ring-fence money for domestic abuse and sexual violence advocate work, which local authorities and others have. And you might not find the data around it, but people tell us day in, day out that we want services to be more coordinated. The PCC should work with the local authorities on how you're funding and commissioning these services so there's not gaps in provision. And I think the positive feedback we're getting by focusing on those specific grassroots community organisations is that they feel like they have more access to support that's tailored to them, language specific, culturally aware, where it wasn't before. And that might not always be reflected in the data that we put on our website, but that's the feeling that we're getting, although there's much more to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Very much, Chair. I've got about 3 questions, one on data, one on collaboration, and one on prevention. So my first question is that you talk about in your data, 92% of the calls are answered within 10 seconds and 48% of the incidents are attended within 15 minutes. However, I have a lot of people complaining after that attendance, the follow-up is very poor. Have you got any data to show how many of the cases that you attend are followed through? And is it by one officer or several officers? Quite often we find people changing shifts and it's not. Can you explain what you think the barriers are and how you will overcome that?
Okay, I'll answer that one. If every crime that's reported is recorded, and there is a duty on the police to respond, and I think it's 28 days, 29 days to go back to keep people informed. That should always happen. How the cases are handled will depend on the nature of the case. And again, that's probably more operational than it is for me. But my understanding, it may be handed on to a specialist team. So it may not be the officer who's come and responded to the immediate call. It may be, he or she may hand it on. Though patrol officers carry a big caseload of crimes. So I think that's, all crimes are followed through. I think where it doesn't always work, and this is not unique to Bedfordshire, I'm afraid, is keeping people informed sometimes, because sometimes it takes time, it takes time to pursue a case. It takes time to get the evidence. Sometimes you can't get the evidence. Sometimes you can't get sufficient evidence to go for a prosecution, but people need to be informed of that. But I'm sure my colleagues can add to that.
Yeah, the Victims Code of Conduct that I mentioned a minute ago, it has different rights. And one of the rights, right 6, is the right to be provided with information about the investigation and prosecution, because it's been identified that across the country, victims aren't always updated. They report something and they don't hear back. So it highlights regular updates for process investigation, frequency and method of contact should be agreed with the police, who will be the point of contact, and to be told when someone's arrested, charged, bailed and released. That's all around the information that people give, and some of that is covered in the other rights. So there is more work that needs to be done, and that's where that national focus and having that tactical lead around victims. So when people report crimes, they are communicated with efficiently, but there's more work to be done.
Yeah, no, I completely appreciate that. But in order for people to feel confident in policing, they need to be responded to, they need to be updated, and they need to be kept informed. And that's an area of improvement. And just for you, so you can take that away. My second question is around collaboration. Collaboration is nothing new. And as you identified that there are women who feel unsafe coming into the town centre. Town centre is very important for our economy. Now, we pay a lot of money towards our collaboration and visible policing in the town centre. I've been witness to 3 incidents where they were quite serious. I stood there for 15 minutes, yet no response. Why aren't we getting value for money? And why do you think that the collaboration has failed in those cases?
But clearly, I don't know the specific cases you refer to. I could turn to my left and my colleagues from the police will be able to tell you how many additional officers that are working based in and working across the town centre, and of course working with the council's enforcement officers too. And the data is showing we have reduced elements of crime significantly over the period. The funding, the council taxpayers in lieu to make a contribution to that funding. So does central government, because 60% of our funding comes from central government. But I hear your point, but I don't know if you are more curious want to talk a bit about the town centre.
Good evening. Just in relation to town centre, it's Chris, obviously the chief inspector for Luton and the town centre, and he's got a certain amount of cops within the town centre. He's just had an increase, I think, is it 4 or 5 cops? 4 within the town centre team, just to increase that presence. Over the last almost 12 months now, the last financial year, we've been doing hotspot policing in a number of our kind of key areas and the town centre and the surrounding areas of the town centre being part of those hotspot policing. So you would have, and you have had, an increase of police presence around the town centre daily over the last almost year now. You can't have police in there, obviously 24/7, but I can assure you there has been more police officers in the town centre and the surrounding area in the last financial year.
To follow up on the last question, this was broad daylight, by the way. We don't expect police to be there 24/7, but we would, if we're going to make any impact, there has to be an appropriate response time, and especially when we're talking about peak times. And in order for people to feel safe, there needs to be visible policing and appropriate response time. Now, my last question is around prevention. In order to prevent, you need to have intelligence. So could you, first of all, tell us how many families do you think or young people would be at risk of committing crime? And you talked about community and everyone else come together. We pay a lot of money to voluntary organizations to do that exact work. And yet we're not making a major impact when it comes to violent crime. Where do you think we're going wrong?
I can't tell you how many families there are, and one of the pieces of work that I'm very keen to do, and I know the council is keen to do, is to begin to work jointly to identify the families and the areas where this is most prevalent. And I think some of the work you're going to do on neighbourhoods will play a key role in that. In terms of, I think we fund voluntary organisations primarily to support victims rather than to prevention. And when the Grassroots Innovation Fund's next phase will be on prevention, so we'll be doing some more funding there. Yeah, the causes of violence are very, it's a very complex set of reasons, and it's not one solution. If there were, I think we'd all have resolved it, but we have to work together at doing that. And if we're going to deal with some of the root causes of crime, again, that's not necessarily for the police to take the lead on.
On this one, I mean, your very good office gives a lot of money to a lot of those organizations, and again, is targeted at prevention. We need to do things differently or have a set of outcomes which are targeted at prevention and particularly for people who are at risk. Now, if we don't do that, we're not going to make any change, are we?
I entirely agree with you, but to do prevention of the kind I think you're wanting is a matter, I think, for joint work between the police, local authorities, the health service, schools, housing associations, employers, and society more widely. It's not something that can solely fall either on my office or on the police. It has to be a partnership approach.
Can I add something there? So the funding that we have, and I know you're talking about lots of voluntary and community sector organisations, but from the OPCC, much of it is ring fenced by the Ministry of Justice and other where the government are giving us money for specific things, like, for example, domestic abuse advocacy support. And that would be one-to-one support for victims of domestic violence or sexual violence or other victims of other crime. It's usually ring fenced, specifically for therapeutic support and other things. I think there is a really good impact that we can see that's having. There's not a possibility when that funding, a lot of it is ring fenced for victim support, for us to then say, actually, we need to focus on all these prevention things. That's where, like John said, we need to work as a partnership on. But there, you can have a look at exactly what we're commissioning on our website, and you can see, and actually, we need to continue having those victim support organisations, because people who have been victims of crime and have that trauma need that support.
Thank you. Steve.
Thank you, Chair. John, once again, an excellent narrative report. And thank you for all the work that you've been doing also out in the community with the Meet and Challenge, the PCC. I would, however, like to pick up the points made by Lee and perhaps enhance upon it. There is a duty, I would say, John, for your office to provide the data. If you are going to hold, as you quite rightly say, the Chief Constable to account, we have a duty to hold your office and the police to account. And we can only do that by reviewing the data that has been set and being able to see what progress has been made towards that data and to pick up underperformance so that we can provide our recommendations and our support back. That was the first point I would like to make, and I think that is important. I will say, not just your report, John, but each of the other reports that we're going to receive tonight are in this same category, and I will be picking those up as we go into other reports, Chair. But if you'd like to pick up that first.
Well, thank you for your compliments in terms, and we had a very good meeting in your and Councillor Iles's ward last month. And if it hadn't been one of the sort of having the monsoon, we might have had an even bigger attendance and a better meeting. It was a really good meeting. In terms of the data, I have a duty to report to the County Police and Crime Panel. This council is represented on it. And that's my accountability route. And you've got 3 members on that as a council on that panel. The data is there. I'm more than happy to let you have data. I'm more than happy to come back and talk about data. I have a huge amount of data available to me. If I got my laptop out, I could, I haven't got it with me, but if I use Umi's laptop, I could access a lot of that data here and now. And I use that to hold the chief to account. But I also do that in the context of comparisons of Bedfordshire's performance with other parts of the country, the direction of travel. I happen to be the national portfolio holder for the Association for all PCCs on police performance, and I sit on the Home Office's Data Reform Board and the Home Office's Data Performance Improvement Board. So data and performance are really key to me too. I wanted to give more an overview this evening, but more than happy to come and talk about it. I love data. Part of my degree is in statistics, sadly. So data matters to me. But I could have gone on to that. And clearly that accountability meeting is about data. But it's also about some of the soft things, because data doesn't always tell you something. For example, it might tell me that there's only been 2 burglaries in South Ward in the last 6 months. I don't know what the number is from memory. Don't quote me on that. But for the individual who's been burgled, it's 100%. And he or she may have gone through a lot of trauma, and that's important too. So some of the softer elements are critical, but more than happy to talk about data.
There is some excellent data available. It's in the Performance and Governance Board reports, and we would like to see some of that. Not all of it. We are councillors that we can only really work on what is presented to us. We do background reading, but we do not have the time. We're not full time to be able to go into that. So I think that is a lesson perhaps that could be learned by not just you, but
I can say I didn't talk about the police white paper and police reform. Could have done. We could have been here for the rest of the night and tomorrow if we had done. But one of the things the Home Office, with the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners and the Chief Counsel of the National Police Chiefs Council, we're working on currently a dashboard, which will be a universal dashboard for all 43 police forces, which will have some of the key data that the public are interested in.
Please. When we were looking at
Sorry,
police
Steve.
and crime plan,
Steve, can I interrupt you there? Is that a question or a comment?
it's a question.
Okay.
So when I'm looking at the police and crime plan progress with regard to women, which is a very important area, and I know it's coming up in a later report, and I've got some questions I'll be raising there. There's no mention of Clare's Law. I mentioned it once before. I would like to see what progress is being made within our police force in following through on the aspects of Clare's Law. The last year, so
Sorry, just on Clare's Law, there has been it has been well applied in the county. Happy to give you the data. It certainly won't be part of that dashboard I talked about, but that data is available.
Steve, can you put your microphone on, please?
Very last point, Chair, and it is a question. There's been lots of talk about, I don't know how to describe it, but in the Metropolitan Police about weeding out unsuitable police officers. And I'm wondering what progress, if we needed to do it in this, in our county, but what progress has been made within Bedfordshire?
The whole issue of culture and behaviour and standards of policing is something both I and the Chief Constable take very, very highly. Bedfordshire Police has a zero tolerance of anybody who, seriously violates standards. And we have a professional standards department jointly with Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire, and that operates it very effectively. I would hope we have, anyone who is surfacing, and they will be dealt with. What's really, I think, very positive is that many of the cases are where fellow officers have reported one of their colleagues who is not meeting the standards. And I think that's a sign of a good organisation. But we must have zero tolerance to it. When I just can't believe that you could have what we saw on Panorama at Charing Cross. You wouldn't get it in Buxton Road. And because actually these guys wouldn't allow it to happen. And there's something, something not right there. But be careful what I say about the Met Police, but, the government think big police forces may be the answer. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I can probably add a little bit more context to some of that. Bearing in mind, before I came to Luton Community Team, I was responsible for recruitment in the police. And there's a couple of comments, one of which is the actual process for recruiting police officers isn't as good as it could be. The way that we recruit and the College of Policing processes that we use to recruit mean we employ a different type of person to who we might have done about 10 years ago. What we did do is set up something called the Student Hub. So student officers used to be tutored, mentored, whatever you want to call it, throughout the county, but we didn't have appropriate governance around their performance, their ethical standards, things like that. So we set up a hub where everybody that works within that hub and tutors people they assess them against a different set of criteria to give us that overview. And what we also did was set up a single point to manage that performance, and whether it's the actual physical performance of the officer, their conduct, their behaviours, their absenteeism and things like that. And that sat with me for 18 months. And what that did is it meant in the previous 2 years, it's called Regulation 13, is the mechanism by which we manage probationary officers. In the 2 years before I started, we managed 6 officers. In the 2 years afterwards, we managed 104, and 38 of them exited the organisation. Now that process exists still. It also allows us to have a little bit more of an overview as to the process by which we recruit people. The College of Policing doesn't give us a huge amount of wiggle room, but we changed the interview questions and did a few little things just to give us an extra layer. We also had quite a big influence around our professional standards and how we vet people and the backgrounds that we go into around who we have. So whilst we're ring fenced by the national process, and the Metropolitan Police have actually come out of that process completely now, we tailored it as much as we could to suit ourselves. It's not perfect, but I think the governance was there post recruitment to weed out anybody that we did deem wasn't suitable.
Thank you. Nigel?
Just one question. Thank you for thank you for the presentation. You said at the start, John, that you are facing reduction in funding, I believe. Could you elaborate on that? Because a reduction in funding obviously is a concern for everybody in this room and across the town.
Following the comprehensive spending review, and then the allocation of funding by the Home Office for policing, we had a 1.7% increase, but we all know the level of inflation. We always know the level of pay award, and our officers are more entitled to their and our staff to their 4.2% pay award. We will this year, to have a balanced budget, have reductions of some £5 million on our overall spend. Fortunately, as the council will know, the local government pension scheme has been reassessed and valued. So nearly £1 million of that 5 million comes from that's very fortuitous. We've also had quite a significant, we spend over 20% of our budget jointly in collaboration with Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire. And we have 3 PCCs and 3 chief constables have reduced the not expenditure on the police element of that, armed policing, traffic policing, dogs, forensics, but on some of the back office functions, and that's produced quite a significant saving. We have managed to achieve a budget that will have no redundancy for Bedfordshire and also no reduction in frontline, but clearly it puts a strain on. Unfortunately, this is a position for nearly every police service in the country. I was given permission by the government to put up the council tax by more than the cap limit. So I've increased it by 6.6%, which brings in just over £1 million additional as well. But it's tight. Part of the problem, and you would have heard me say this many years ago, when I was on the police authority 30 years ago, I said the same thing. Well, it takes a long time to change. Bedfordshire is disadvantaged by the funding formula the successive governments have used. So it's not a party point I'm making at all, that they regard Bedfordshire, put it in simple terms, as a rural county. So our funding is sort of on par with Cumbria and Lincolnshire and Norfolk. But we have a crime profile which is much more like parts of London, parts of the metropolitan West Midlands, East Midlands, and so on. We get a special grant of just over £9 million towards a recognition of that for both Hill and Costello, which is about serious organised crime and gun crime, crudely. We are still waiting for a confirmation from the Home Office. We're going to get it for the financial year beginning on the 1st of April. Last year we heard towards the end of April, so I think we'll get that again. However, that's a recognition of our underfunding, but it's a much more systematic program. And because of police reform, I think it's very unlikely the government would change the formula until they've changed the whole system.
Thank you. Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you. John, two questions. First one is in terms of, this is probably I've asked you that number of times, visible policing and where you said we got extra funding for PCSOs, and in the ward that I am now, we do have a PCSO. Has that made in terms of, public engagement or communicating with public in terms of not only just the building the confidence, but also communication? Has that improved? Have you got any data on that at all?
Last year, through the Neighbourhood Police Guarantee, there will be 30 additional combination of police officers and PCSOs in the neighbourhood teams. And for the coming year, as I said earlier, the government expects us to increase the neighbourhood policing by 16, but that'll have to be redeployed from other parts because we don't have the additional funding. And because of some other changes that have occurred, for example, moving some other teams into neighbourhood, more directly into neighbourhood, is why Chris has got some additional officers. Has somebody called a community enforcement team that's now been dispersed across the hubs in the 3 local authority areas. We have we won't be recruiting any additional PCSOs, but we're not reducing the number. Some police forces are reducing their PCSOs by a dramatic number in this coming year because of the financial constraint. Because PCSOs are not police officers; they are civilian staff, and therefore, don't have the tenure and security that a police officer has. I would like to see more PCSOs. I'd like to see more police officers. We have got more, but even 30. Just think about 30 is great, but and it enhances the team under the superintendent's command by a significant proportion. But 30 additional people over the whole of the county, working shifts, having entitlement to time off, having holidays, having occasional sick leave, presumably, but also training. The number of additional officers that represents isn't a great deal, unfortunately. However, I think I made the point earlier, and I think it's really important. I make it almost every meeting of this kind I go to. We may have a neighbourhood team of just 100 and something like that there. That's over 100, but we have 1,500, nearly 1,500 officers. So if you dial 999, it won't be a community officer. Very unlikely to be a neighbourhood officer who responds. It will be someone from patrol in a car. If the case is for a serious sexual case, it'll be someone from the RASO team. It could be someone from the CID team. So we have specialist teams and specialist teams working in areas like cyber and fraud and so on. So, and those officers are available. So it's not just those on. Everyone wants to see Bobbies on the beat. Use that phrase, and they are important for public confidence. They're also important because they'll talk to people and pick up intelligence, but they're not the only part of the police response. Police, we've talked about data. Police is very, very data driven. So where there is more crime, the police will be allocated to. And I always say report, because how often do I hear people say there's a lot of crime on our estate, or there's a lot of shoplifting in this street? I go back and we look at the records, and well, no one's actually told us. Loads of people. So if you report more, you'll get more response.
Thank you, John. I was talking in terms of the confidence of the people to be able to believe in it. I was getting a lot of feedback from the residents in my ward who said, well, we ring and we never see a policeman on foot or talk to. And this is what I'm talking about. The PCSOs made that huge difference in terms of talking to the public. That's what I'm talking about.
Maybe when Chief Inspector Simmons gives his talk, you ask him about his teams, because his neighbourhood teams will work in your ward as they will in every other ward in the county, in the county, but specifically in Luton.
Yeah. My second question really is in terms of sorry, did you want to come in?
I was just going to say, just a point around PCSOs, which I think is probably worth knowing and give some context, is when PCC showed our response times. So for the immediate response ones, we get to them 48% of the time within the allocated time. We can't send PCSOs to those sorts of incidents. And because of their terms and conditions, PCSOs also aren't allowed to own an investigation. So whilst they're nice to have in terms of responding to the public, investigating their crime, they can't do it. So around neighbourhood policing specifically, particularly around Luton neighbourhood policing, we carry a lot of crime, we carry a lot of risk, and we can't allocate PCSOs that crime or that risk. What we have done is a slight change of tact recently around serious and organised crime, where police officers will do police officers' job and a PCSO will do a PCSO's job. And what's happened in the last decade or so is we've really blurred the lines of PCSOs, and we expect more and more and more of them, which actually takes them away from what the public want in terms of that engagement, talking to people, setting up engagements, being that visible face. So I think that reset around what their role actually is will hopefully see over the next 12, 18 months a bit of a change in terms of how visible those PCSOs are, hopefully.
Second question is in terms of the hate crime, particularly in terms of Islamophobia, it has increased quite considerably in terms of data. How many of those, have been successfully investigated, or at least, in terms of gone to the prosecution side? I haven't seen any of that data at all.
Well, we're very fortunate to have two officers who have a very particular responsibility for hate crime here, so they can talk much more about that than I can. Hate crime is something which they and the police take very seriously. I take very seriously, and Islamophobia in particular. The threshold for hate crime and what sometimes you and I as lay people might think of hate crime can be different, and that's a challenge. But again, we must encourage people to report hate crime, and it will be properly investigated. And so, the social cohesion team have a role to play in that too, in terms of, some of the initial triaging. Is it a hate crime or is it not a hate crime? But it really is important. But I made the point when I spoke, we're facing at the moment a lot of understandable concern and anxiety in communities. I don't want to inflame the situation because it should be safe, but that doesn't always get reflected in hate crime. And sometimes people are fearful because something that's happening 30 miles away, maybe several thousand miles away too. So it's a complex area, but hate crime is treated very well. But as I say, we've got the officers who actually have the county-wide responsibility for hate crime with us. So
I can give you a really brief overview of hate crime, and it's probably important to do so because I think we've made some real inroads with it recently. The headlines around hate crime are we've never got it right. I think having the cohesion team that we have, which I'm also responsible for, does help because we have that constant, which is useful. August last year, the positive outcome rate, so that means a charge, a caution, a out of court resolution, something criminally positive for hate crime was 6%. The national average is 8%. So we were underneath the national average. As of the end of last month, the positive outcome rate for hate crime was in Bedfordshire was 34.8%. So we've increased it enormously, and we're 3-4 times the national average. What we have seen, and we do see with hate crime, national, international events will change how much is reported, and you can see if you look back over the last year, decade, however long, you can marry up the number of hate crimes with national events. Our hate crime figures are going down. Now, normally when crime goes down, that's a positive thing. With hate crime, it's a negative thing because I'm not comfortable with the fact that we're preventing hate crime. It's just people aren't reporting hate crime. PCC pledged some money today, actually, for a new third-party reporting process for it. We're going to test it in a couple of places first to check that it's suitable, and when it is, we're going to launch it almost. That's going to be done through my own advisory group, through the Council of Faith, etc. So we'll make sure those comms hit who they need to hit, because confidence around hate crimes are a real slow burner. And we'd seek to improve reporting. We've tested it at the L&D, and the reporting at the L&D has gone up. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's well over 100% in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks. So it does work, but of course, international events, especially recent ones and the ones over Christmas, whilst they don't help and undermine confidence, they do give us an opportunity for that engagement bit. So hate crime is a slow burner. We took it on as neighbourhood policing in September last year. We've made some really significant improvements. There's a hell of a lot to come, but it won't be done overnight because we've got to change an issue around public confidence that's existed for since policing was conceptualised. But we've got the PCC's support with it from a financial perspective. And that has been agreed today. So I think actually we'll hopefully start to make some really positive stuff, and some really positive comms will come out of that soon. And then through the IG and the different groups that we've got that are involved in that, we can see if it works. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But it's going in the right direction, certainly. Well, I'm comfortable that it is.
Thank you. Councillor Begum.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it really brief. So when you talk about on slide, let me pull out the slide now. When you've spoken about the slide for reinvigorating local policing, you talk about obviously the money that you've secured for Bedfordshire, you talk about local policing. You've also discussed on your previous slide, no, sorry, on slide 8 about the work that's being done in Bedfordshire. Out of all these figures and the sort of things that you're quoting, you quote it as Bedfordshire. Part of that obviously is Luton. So can you tell me what part of it is Luton? So particularly slide 8, where you're talking about the excellent police service. You kind of say that you did a polling. What kind of sample size are we talking about? What kind of demographic, what kind of area? How much of that encompasses Luton? Because then this is quite broad. And obviously us being in Luton, we're going to particularly focus on Luton figures.
The polling was conducted by More in Common, who are, up there with Ipsos and Morris, so they're national pollsters. And they had a sample size, I think it was 2,000, but that was statistically greater than they would have for many of their other polling. And they ensured that it reflected the ethnic, gender, geographical compilation and age of the county. So those figures, I haven't got it with me, but there were some breakdowns by CSP areas. So I could share some of the Luton figures. That's overall. There was very little variation on things like satisfaction levels across the county.
It's just I think it paints a picture that isn't quite accurate to Luton, because like colleagues have said in here, they call the police, they don't really, from hearing all the colleagues in the room, I don't hear that satisfaction coming through. So again, it's kind of like encompassing all of Bedfordshire. It's not accurate or representative of Luton. So I'd be interested in knowing what the satisfaction rate of Luton is, because even in my
the satisfaction rate in Luton was higher than the county average, and the lowest was in central Bedfordshire. But we can share those stats with you.
And I think I know what you're saying. So the sample is statistically significant. So in the same way that you'll have polling on sort of projections for other things, they look at the data, they break it down by demographics. So if you go on our website, or actually you can look at the CSP minutes, I think is it in the CSP minutes, Luton Community Safety Partnership, you'll see the data from that. And it's not all positive, actually, it's given us lots of areas of improvement. So where you're saying that it's not reflective of what people are saying in the room, if you have a good look at it, it's got loads of data, reams of stuff that's come out of it. That you might find is interesting, but some of the bits that you'll be like, yeah, absolutely, I've heard that already. But it's Bedfordshire data, but it's broken down by Luton, Central Beds, and Bedford, by age, demographics, all sorts. But that's why we commissioned a poll to do it rather than just putting a survey out.
Okay, again, I think the sample sizing is quite small. So when you compare the population to the sample size, it's not really, again, a true picture of what's going on.
We could discuss it all evening. The pollsters work to national standards. When you see polls on, who you're going to vote for, they're on a smaller sample. Yeah. So actually, the sample size was industry standard, and it got that. We were very clear. We wanted it by ethnic group, by age, by gender, by rural, urban, and by the CSP areas, and we got all that data. And as Umi says, some of that was good, some of it was bad. 62%, 62% may have support or confidence. I'm concerned about the 40% that don't as well.
Okay, my other question. Obviously, I'll go back and look at some of this data as well. And if I've got any questions, I'll email you, if that's all right. The other thing I wanted to ask about was about slide 7, where you're talking about protecting women and children. You said that there needs to be better data sharing. Does that kind of suggest that we don't really share the data very well between agencies and so on? And when you talk about changing behaviors of obviously and attitudes that men hold towards women, how do you propose to do that?
But before I do, we all have to change the behaviour of men. It's not for me to do it personally. Hopefully I can change my own behaviours are good. But actually, I think we all have a collective responsibility on that. And I think it often starts to move younger, but we know some of it's not just the younger men. In terms of that training, there is a lot of data sharing. It's how we can make that even more effective and swifter, and use things like technology to be able to read across databases held by different agencies.
Yeah, I would just say, so in terms of data sharing, I think the county has made really good progress with that. There is a sort of strategic board that looks at data sharing around issues that the MASH will look at. The problem is, and this is an issue across the whole country, every time something happens, a serious case review, there's always something that says if organisations communicated, you know, this would have been prevented and stuff like that. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think in Bedfordshire we're making good progress. Like John said, that what we're piloting with Bedford Council and the police was using AI to data share, because remember, everyone uses different systems. Every local authority in the county uses different systems. Health uses a different system. Police use a different system. And then there's all these GDPR, other things that stop people from being able to access it. So that's why they're always meeting strategically, and Diraj is part of those forums actually, where they look at how we can data share better. It's not that it's not happening. Going back to your point around, it's just that we need to do a lot more. Your point around perpetrators. So we commission organisations that work with perpetrators of domestic violence, and there's more information on our website. Something called the Chrysalis Centre, and there's other projects, especially locally in Luton, where they work with men to change their behaviours, particularly when they're like sort of medium risk, abuse is ongoing, but they want to change, and sort of works with families. So there's a few different types of programmes, there's a few different ways in which that's done, because we can't always police our way, and we'll see nationally domestic abuse statistics show that convictions are very rare, and you can't always police it. Sometimes it's about education. Sometimes people that become abusers weren't ever shown how to not be an abuser, because that's what they were replicated when they were younger, and these programs work around it. So it's not all about sort of, and John made a really kind point there, and men need to think about their behaviours, but it is also about supporting people once they've done that to do it. One of the things we're bidding for at the Home Office is something called the Drive Project, which works with very high risk domestic abuse perpetrators. And it's like a very specific coordinated approach with one-to-one support from police, local authority partners, etc., that we're going to work on as a partnership if we do get that funding. But those initiatives are really successful, and I don't know if I should say successful, but there's really good feedback we get from it, and you can find some more information online around it on our website.
Okay, thank you. We do have quite a lot to get through this evening. So in terms of agenda item 7, the recommendation is to note the presentation from the Police and Crime Commissioner. Are we happy to note it?
I'm planning to put a recommendation at the end, which will cover all of our reports. Is that going to be acceptable?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mahmood.
Chair, if it's anything to do with it, I've got to leave in about 5-10 minutes. I've got another meeting somewhere else to go. What is it that he's proposing, so we can hear what he's proposing?
That's fine. Councillor Steve, what Councillor Mahmood is saying is that he will have to leave very shortly. So what recommendation are you proposing? He wanted to be part of it before he goes. Oh, it's subject to the end of, okay. It's subject to how the rest of the items progress. Okay,
Make a quick comment and reflection. A lot of the questions that were asked here today, you wanted really specific things. It would be good if beforehand you told us those specific things you wanted, because this was meant to be a report on update and progress on the police and crime plan. It's already gone on for an hour and a half. And if we give everything that you wanted, it would have gone even longer. I would say for people that are really, really keen, the police and crime panel is where every 6 weeks or however often we go through policing specifically, lots of different things, and you're there to hold John to account. We also have the community safety partnership where some of these things happen. So it's not that we don't have the data and that we can't share what we're doing around Clare's law and stuff. It's just that there's only so much time we have. So in the future, I think it would be useful if you told us exactly what you wanted to present beforehand and consider some of the other forums in which we share that data.
okay.
Chair, this will be a helpful recommendation in line of what you're saying.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, just want to make a comment on what has been said. This is a scrutiny meeting, and when you come, you have to be prepared. We can't make exceptions for you. It's not a new trend that we'll be setting for you, unfortunately. So this meeting is conducted just the same as others. So the whole point, you're in a job, is to know your stuff when you come here. I'm sorry.
Apologies. Do you mind if I just say, sorry, Azam, it's not that we didn't want to answer the questions, it's just that a lot of the questions that you're asking, if we were to cover every single thing we do, we could be here for 12 hours to talk and talk and talk. So if you've made it a little bit more focused, and I know we do that in other committee meetings because I'm part of many committees within the council, a bit of guidance on what to report on would be helpful, because then we can come prepared.
Okay, thank you. Well, we must get along, and I'm assuming the recommendation is on par with what I'm thinking at the moment. But we'll wait for the recommendation, and then if it misses the point, I'll cover that off. So the recommendation is to note the policing progress plan, and is everyone happy for that? Thank you. We move over to agenda item 8. Now, considering the amount of time this has taken, can I slightly adjust the way that we're going to tackle this agenda item? We have 8 different themes to get through. Now, we're going to take the reports as read, and we're going to move straight to questions. But before we do that, can I have once I call out, can the individual leads please just put your hands up so that we know who you are. So in terms of violence and exploitation, thank you. Safeguarding children, criminal exploitation and offending, thank you. Domestic abuse and on-street sexual exploitation, thank you. Drugs, alcohol and mental health, again, yeah, okay. That reduces down to 7 people then. That's fine. Where are we? Town centre safety. Town centre safety. No, that's yourself. Okay. Antisocial behaviour and environmental crime. Hate crime and extremism. That was, where are we?
So.
Right. Okay. Reducing and reoffending. Reducing reoffending. Gemma, that's yourself.
Chair, the head of probation is online tonight. She's up there. You can see her with her hand up, and that's Lisa Jenkins.
Okay. Thank you. Right. So you're welcome to ask questions to any of these 8 members. But if you can put your hands up to whoever has questions.
Chair, we were a retail. We were expecting a retail. Crime report.
That I'm going to cover off after this agenda. Right.
Is that going to be part of it?
So there is no report, but I will cover it off after this. So let's get this out of the way, and then we will tackle that. Any questions for any of these 8 themes, 8 leads? Put your hands up, please, so I can note it down. Steve, anybody else? Okay, I've only got 3 questions here. So Councillor Steve, do you want to start off?
Relating to drug and alcohol. But if I could pick on, and also mental health. So if I could start with the first question. We see that in the current emerging challenges for drugs and alcohol, we see that there is a continued impact of the present procurement on service user and staff retention, and it's a key concern going forward for 26-27. My first question on that is there a conflict between what the commissioners are looking for, which is value for money, as compared to what we are trying to do within the service generally? My first question.
So sorry, it should read present procurement. What I would say about that is that we know that when you re-procure a service, that you go through a period of destabilization of the service as staff. There's a higher staff turnover, and that has an impact on people's success within the treatment service. So that's the reason for that comment in the slide. So what you're asking is there a conflict between what we're trying to do and what we're looking for? No, I think what we're looking for is to see ongoing improved treatment outcomes for people who have drug and alcohol problems. And as commissioners, we're looking to make sure that as many people who need access to those services get that access. And that the quality of that service is good, and as many people as possible complete treatment and have a positive outcome. As commissioners, that's what we're looking for as in terms of value for money. So I hope I'm getting what you're asking there.
My second question is that a key aspect of staff retention, not just in Luton, but nationally, is staff burnout. So what are the potential solutions? Because my understanding of people that I know that are in the service would say that they probably have a caseload of around 50 to 60 clients. They perhaps have a very good, certainly within Luton, a very good start when they are, maybe they have a couple of weeks when they're kind of introduced into the service before they're given their caseload. But after that, they're kind of left to their own devices. So what are the potential solutions? I know this is a national problem, but what are the potential solutions? Do we need to look at the possibility of having 2 staff members? I don't think we could do that, to look at the caseload in case, because once we lose the staff member, that connection that they have built up with the client has gone. So we are fighting an uphill problem that we're not able to deal with. So what are the potential solutions that we can find?
So you're right. There has been such a focus on getting more and more people into treatment that the numbers and the caseloads have increased for people. There is now a new focus on quality of treatment. And so we hope to see, and there is data that I wasn't able to present tonight, that it's that quality. So we will see a reduction in numbers, but we will hopefully see an increase in the quality. But a reduction in numbers is important in terms of the staff burnout. You're absolutely right. So I think it's that refocusing of what are the key outcomes or performance indicators that we're interested in? And now it will be the focus will far more be on quality rather than just the numbers, the quantity.
My third question related to this is, in order for the staff to be able to get clients into treatment, how do we overcome the problem of drop in and drop out, so that we know that our client is going to be there for a period of time, they then withdraw from the service, but they might sign up again for the service a number of weeks later, and we know that that is an ongoing problem. So how do we actually do what you're suggesting, which is to get more clients into treatment when they're dealing with a problem of clients coming in, leaving, coming back in again because of the paperwork that goes with it?
In part, I would say that that's to do with appropriate referrals as well when people are ready for treatment. But there's also the issue, what we're hoping to do with our new model, which is starting at the beginning of April, is there will be something called Alliance Care, which will be specifically for people who have issues but are maybe not ready or do not want to engage fully with treatment services in the traditional way. So separating them out from those who are actually ready for treatment is quite important. So yeah, it is about appropriate referrals from all of the different referral sources. A lot of referrals are self-referrals. So I hope that answers partly.
Councillor Khan.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question probably affects all the services. We've seen continuous begging and aggressive begging, which adds to the negative perception of our town. Now, we've been fighting this for quite some time, and some of it is, related to addiction, drug and alcohol. Some of it is linked to exploitation. It's not just ladies who get exploited, it's some of these vulnerable people who've been controlled by people at the top who are then put on the streets for begging. Now, other towns have dealt with it better than we have. Where do you think we are going wrong, and how are we going to fix this problem?
And I ask Gemma, who from your team is heading off the town centre?
So Chief Inspector Chris Simmons is the head of the town centre, but I'm sure that Nicola will say that we are looking at this from a public health approach. So I don't know which one of you wants to speak.
PC Simmons, can I ask?
Yeah, from a policing perspective, begging is difficult. And it's difficult for several reasons, one of which is it's a lifestyle and not everybody wants to end that lifestyle. Beggars can make a fairly significant amount of money. What we have done with the town centre is, and what we struggle with deterrent sentencing around begging, because we have a escalation process around ASB. I won't call it low-level ASB because it doesn't feel like that's what it is, but we can, after initial engagements and things like that don't work, we go into the kind of the criminal justice system, if you like, and we start off with something called a community protection warning notice. And when that's been breached, we move up to a community protection notice, which is arrestable, and then we move up to a criminal behaviour order. And the criminal behaviour order is the top thing we can do. Getting the CPS to do anything about CBOs is an absolute nightmare, frankly. We present them at court, they go nowhere. We put people in front of courts with sometimes dozens of breaches of a CPN, and because of the way that the CPS is set up at the moment, the prosecutors don't even have time to read the bundle, read the application, and we go through that process and a CBO is not even considered. And that's the challenge, because that's the deterrent sentencing. Are people who are begging going to go to prison? Probably not. You can't fine them because they haven't got any money. They don't want to, in a lot of cases, go into treatment plans and things like that. So it causes us a real problem. I've got a meeting at the end of this month with the head of the CPS for the Chiltern area, which is our area, that looks at CBOs to see if we can find a better way of doing it. Because at the moment, all we do is we move them. So if you go to the Gypsy Lane shops now, you'll see there's lots of people begging in that car park. And that's because we've done what we can from a deterrent perspective in the town centre, and it's just displaced them somewhere else. And then you have an issue at the airport, because then they all sleep in the airport and they get booted at the airport, and that causes a separate problem. So without that deterrent sentencing, we struggle with begging. We really do.
Yeah, from a policing perspective, when I talk about exploitation, as you know, there is organized begging. So from your perspective, it's getting to the root of the problem, not dealing with the individual. What plans have you got to deal with that?
It's organised begging, and sometimes it's exploitation, sometimes it's planned. If it's planned, it's a fraud. It's a completely different offence. But to prove that again is difficult. I can anecdotally tell you about one where we managed to follow that person, and their girlfriend picked them up in a nice new Mercedes, and off they went back to their address in Finchley. But we've got to watch that person in plain clothes for the entirety of their time in that town, and because we're watching that person for that amount of time, we sometimes actually need to look into covert surveillance authorities in order to do it, and we'll never get a surveillance authority to do it because it's someone begging. It doesn't hit the threshold that we need in order to do it. So begging's really challenging. Even when it's organised begging, it's challenging.
Again, follow. I mean, yeah, some of it may be complex, but it's not as rocket science as it may sound. I've seen people being dropped off by someone in a van in Bury Park behind Crescent Hall. If I could see it, I'm sure some of your officers could see it too.
My question to you is then, have you reported it? And it comes back to what we said already. If you don't report it, we can't map it. We don't know that it happened.
What I'm saying, I spoke to a police officer, community safety police officer, and said, here's a problem. There it is. Go and see it.
It makes it really difficult for us because that's not reported properly. So I can't allocate resources. And as you'll find out as we go through this, we struggle resourcing wise a little bit to manage the demand. If you don't report that properly, I won't allocate resources to it, because as far as I'm concerned, it didn't happen. It has to be recorded so that I can look at it. And people in this meeting have talked about wanting figures. Well, if we're not reporting things properly, the figures are irrelevant anyway. So if you report it, we can take action on it. We can deal with it as intelligence submissions. We can record it as a crime. We can do all sorts of stuff. It will pop up on ASB hotspot mapping. We can assign when we talk about the hotspot policing, we get additional funding for that. We can assign resources to it with that additional funding. But unless it's reported, we simply just.
I expected the police officer to do that, but if that hasn't happened, then maybe I need to bring and do it myself.
It's best to. Yeah.
As far as drug and alcohol is concerned, of course, we need to engage with these people. We need to prevent them from continuing their behavior. How is it that we have not been able to engage? And I'm talking about some individuals who've been there 5 years, and they're same faces, or sometimes the group of friends, and they're changing and going around. How is it that we have not been able to engage with them or rehabilitate them?
Thank you. The individuals who are involved in street activities, be that raising funds or begging, street drinking and using drugs, there's a core group that are fairly well known to services, and it's a very complex issue. They're very complex individuals with backgrounds of extreme trauma. They are engaged and have been engaged with multiple services at different times. Support is continually offered to them. It's incredibly hard. Services keep on at it, but we have a basic issue of sometimes people just will not engage, and we do not have, as far as I'm aware, any powers to force them. So this is a very, very difficult issue where we're really trying to look at what are the causes of this? What's the root cause? How can we help people, meet people where they are, and support them appropriately? In terms of drugs and alcohol services, we have outreach workers who go out into the community, into the town centre and work with individuals. So things are being tried, but yes, we're still trying to learn as much as we can from other areas. We are part of the town centre task force, public health are, and we are putting forward, we're working up a paper at the moment about another way that we can approach this in a but it takes real partnership working from across health, drug and alcohol services, mental health, police, neighbourhood enforcement, everybody working together. So we're going to keep on trying. But you're right, there is lots that we can learn from other areas, and we're trying to do that.
And finally, that is my point, because we talked about collaboration working well. It needs to work better, particularly with issues like this, which has a massive impact, not just on individuals, but other people who come into the town centre and also the economy, and it has a multi-layered kind of impact. So we need to learn from others, and we need to learn from others quickly, because the problem is persistent and it's gone on for long enough. My last question, Dave, you do amazing work, and and I've complimented you on that. And that obviously links into some of the stuff which is going on. Obviously, you look at more preventing youth offending stuff. I remember you did a presentation talking about there was about 3,000 people who are not known to the system, could be at risk. Now, have you been able to get more closer to those individuals? Do you have any stats and share some of the good stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the compliment. Yeah, I mean, obviously for the CSP, I report very much about children coming into the criminal justice system in the first place. So the lower the number, the more successful we are at preventing children coming in. And, quite clearly Q3 has been, fantastic for this service. We've outperformed all of our key comparators. MAGPAN cases are down, which is a clear indication of, bearing in mind that a young person getting into MAGPAN, it has to either be mapped to a known gang or heavily associated with someone that is. Last year we had close to 300, and, currently at the moment, at time of writing this report, it was 115. I think it's 116, 117 now. So that's a clear indicator that we're reaching the right children, the right demographic. So, as we sit here now, we're doing extremely well at getting that kind of message. And, I also, we haven't had a serious incident for some time. I mean, clearly I don't want to tempt any fate, and I hate saying things like that out loud. So much of what we've done over the last couple of years, not just as our service, it's the wider partnership, and that's our colleagues from Children's Services, our colleagues from the police, and colleagues from around the council. We learn from every incident, from every fatality. I mean, you heard PCC talking earlier about kind of identifying vulnerabilities earlier. One of the things that came out of the tragedy of Ashraf's death in September 2023 was a commission for an early screening tool from Beds Uni. So contextual safeguarding started from Beds Uni. That tool, all the research has been done in relation to that now. That's due for delivery. We'll be looking at piloting that within a school come September. I know September seems far away, but this is quite an innovative development that's likely to have a really huge impact on identifying much earlier in children, and I'm talking 9, 10 years old, the types of vulnerabilities that bring them into exploitation when they're later. So really looking at the relationship between adolescent childhood experiences and trauma and the impact that those have on behaviour, and eventual violence. So that's going to be a game changer. We are, I mean, you asked for metrics. Obviously, key performance indicators get reported within the youth justice plan at the kind of the end of the year. You get a very small snapshot here, and it's kind of very, very positive at this moment in time. The way we're performing against those KPIs is, I've got them in front of me now. We are outperforming our statistical family, the national and the regional, in all of our key performance indicators. So that's in relation to first-time entrants, reoffending, and use of custody. That gives you an indication of just how this partnership is bucking the trends we see elsewhere. We often get described as a London borough, but actually Luton has, more people per hectare. So actually we're more densely populated than some of the London boroughs. So, on paper, we've got no right outperforming some of these London boroughs, but we are. And that's a metric that I think we can all be proud of.
Councillor Hanif.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My first question, because the thing is in the slide pack, it says awaiting data for town centre safety. So this is to anyone, where are we with antisocial behaviour, and in particular to St George's Square, where for some time, especially families haven't felt safe coming in there. So where are we with that, just for the benefit of this meeting?
So with St George's Square, the reason St George's Square is a bit of a challenge is multifaceted, to be perfectly honest. We've got several operations in the town centre which don't directly address St George's Square, but have a footprint within them. One of those was a robbery op called Operation Rovik, because we had quite a few robberies in the town centre. We've managed to reduce those by 80%, I think, now. And some of that was just police work, covert police work, overt police work. Some of it was around working with the council to remove some of the things that kept people there. A lot of the victims of the robberies were the perpetrators of ASB anyway. So we kind of managed to mop that whole thing up. There is an operation called Operation Lunex, which is a operation specifically for the asylum accommodation at Lee Halls. That's quite an overt policing operation, so that's reduced a lot of the ASB as well. And a lot of the sentiment from people that we engage with, particularly around businesses, suggests that actually a lot of the feelings of safety or unsafety, or people feeling unsafe, actually comes from that, because you have groups of men just kind of loitering around. Whether or not that's justifiable feeling or not is up for debate, really, because the crime footprint from that location is actually quite small, but it feels bad. And then we've got Operation Foresight, which is, and I wanted to touch on Operation Foresight anyway, briefly. During the summer last year, we had some funding from the government around the summer policing plan, which was around safer town centres and things like that. And Operation Foresight is Luton's specific response to that. We spoke earlier around an increase in officers of 4 officers. I think context is key with these, because that's an increase of 100%, because to start off with, I had 4 officers and now I've got 8 to run that town centre. Luckily for me, they're a really good group and they've achieved some really, really good results. But Operation Foresight, I'm not naive to think that it's going to solve crime in Luton Town Centre. It isn't. It's a sticking plaster. It's a reactive operation that deals with lots of different policing tactics to deal with things that affect town centres. So retail theft, knife crime, drug use, things like that. We did try something earlier, and I stitched the PCC up ever so slightly with this, because I briefed him on a big op where we had loads of dedicated resource for the town centre, and then in the way that Bedfordshire is, and we've spoken about the funding model, they had to be redeployed to manage some risk in other places, and I did actually get some of those officers anyway. Operation Foresight specifically focuses around St George's Square, around that particular area, and it's quite flexible. It moves around quite a lot. It's a partnership op. We do a lot of work, a huge amount of work with the net officers, trading standards, immigration, etc. And to give you some reassurance, I think we've had officers from the City of London and the Met come and see how we do it because it's so successful, and it's something that they haven't been able to replicate with their completely differing budgets and things like that. We are one of the front runners nationally around e-scooters, dealing with e-scooters in the town centre. Funnily enough, it's actually probably the best bit of public engagement we've had, in that we've run 2 days around e-scooters and e-bikes, and we've seized 72 of them. Causes us a problem because you can't put them in any police buildings or premises because they like to spontaneously catch fire. But we know that a lot of crimes committed on e-scooters, e-bikes, and obviously people commit crime because of them as well, because they're something that people like to steal. In terms of retail crime, because I know that was a focus specifically, year to year, retail crime in Luton has gone up 1.3%. So it hasn't increased a huge amount, but it has increased. Some of that is because we have, so for the top locations, which is Berry Park, Sainsbury's, Wilkinson's, and somewhere else in the mall, TK Maxx in the mall, they've got specific problem management plans there, which means that everything gets recorded, everything. And they've stayed as the top locations. So because they've increased, we're pretty comfortable that's increased because of the partnership work we're doing there that actually encourages them to increase. There's a lot of work going on around those. As I say, they've got their own problem management plans. The ASB, so we had the summer policing plan, then we had the winter policing plan, and now we've got the ASB plans for the summer, and a lot of that focuses on retail crime as well. So they'll get additional resourcing and additional focus. The positive bits to note are that whilst retail crime in Luton has gone up 1.3%, the solved rate has gone up nearly 14%. So whilst there is more crime, we're solving a lot more crime. And I think, and that's up nearly 3% from last year. The really, really important thing is, and I'm going to give you some work to do, sorry, because I'm going to compare Luton to the rest of the county. If you look at the number of crimes that Luton community teams solve, we are head and shoulders above the other 2 areas. And I'm really going to stitch up North Bedfordshire. North Bedfordshire community policing teams solve 7.3% of all their crime. Luton community teams solve 53% of theirs. So it's completely uncomparable. We do things very differently in Luton because the risk that we carry is different, but the staffing profile remains the same. A lot of the positivity around our outcome rates is because of the partnership work. No, the other areas are very jealous of how we work with our council colleagues and everybody else, because not everybody has that, and we've alluded to that a couple of times already. And Central Beds, who are a more engaged local authority than Bedford, their outcome rate is still 20% broadly lower than ours. It's about 18.9% lower than ours. So yes, there's a little bit more crime. I think the management of the crime is better, and I think our solved rates are significantly better than everybody else's. And whilst that doesn't necessarily make it feel better, there's a lot of people in this room that are involved in the Lunex things anyway, that is heading very much in the right direction now. And I think when we get properly on top of that, then the feel will be different as well. So hopefully that answers your questions in a really convoluted way.
Yeah, thank you for your detailed response. I think you've kind of answered my next question, because it said in the minutes that 2 uniformed officers were going to be put in the town centre. So you're telling me you've got 4. So that's reassuring. And so there's a lot of good news stories coming out here. One last question before that. I think with the success rate that you're enjoying, I think the public needs to feel or see that that's happening. So I think with your joint partnerships, I think you need to communicate that a lot more. So a bit of PR work there perhaps could come in handy. Additively with the comms team, you can get the message out that we are making the town centres safer, with the 2040 vision. encourage that. We've got the nighttime economy report's going to come out. We want to, encourage people to come to the town centre. So that kind of leads me to my last question. So you said, is the 1.3% increase, is that being recorded because of better detection rates, because of more resources are being allocated to that?
I think the increase in the crime recording is partly due to that, and we can attribute, we've spoken about hate crime already, and I think the hate crime increase will attribute to more people reporting hate crime because it is a positive story, but the context is the important bit there. With the shoplifting, because of the retail crime, because of the way that we have oversight through the ASB action plans, the summer policing plan, winter policing plan, those problem management plans for the high crime areas have an individual owner. So there's that single point of contact for that shop who can, and we use those for advice around how that shop is structured, where their CCTV is, what their security looks like, etc., etc. And of course, part of community policing is building those relationships with people. And I think that is probably, for me, anecdotally, the main reason that we've seen those increases is because actually they've got that common person who can go through that crime with them, look at the CCTV with them, and deal with it with them. I went to the Tilly Awards, which is the National Problem Solving in Policing Awards, at the end of last year, and there were some really interesting things around how they manage bulk shopliftings and problem solve the CBO issue and things like that. So that's something we'll look at as well, which should hopefully improve the detection rate slightly more as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any pertinent comments to make on this agenda item before we note it? Steve?
Quick comment, please, with regard to it was on the mental health side. Right, I just find that. It was very pleasing to see that there's a new 11-bedded accommodation unit specifically for women. One of the problems historically has been asking women to be in mixed hostels, and they clearly didn't want to do that, and they felt unsafe in doing that. So it's good that there is this 11-bedded new hospital that's opened up specifically for women who've been involved in exploitation. Hopefully, more beds can be provided for women. One of the things about homeless women, and may I talk about homeless women, is that they are a hidden cohort. A lot of studies going into that. They don't easily come forward, and when we do identify them, it's important that we should be able to give them a safe haven in which to be located. Quite often, they may have additional traumas, such as they may have children that they're not seeing because their children are into care. They have these additional problems, obviously, sometimes with alcohol and with drug misuse. So I'm just hoping as we go forward, we're making good efforts, but we need to do more. It's one of the key things I would take from what I see in this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. We now move over to the recommendation, which is to note the presentations from the Community Safety Partnership and the 8 lead areas. Is everyone happy with that?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Now, before Steve, I'll come on to your recommendation. Commissioner, the agenda item 9, tackling retail and vehicle crime priorities and challenges, has not been presented in this meeting today. Can you just provide an overview of why it was not presented and whether you can bring it into another OSB meeting, not the special meeting, but another normal OSB meeting?
I'm going to do a very quick hospital pass because actually this was a report by the police, not by the Police and Crime Commissioner. But I think Chief Inspector Simmons has actually dealt with retail crime in his in answer to some of the earlier questions.
That's fine. We were expecting a standalone 2 reports, one on tackling crime, retail crime, and one on vehicle crime. I believe the name we had here was Assistant Inspector Vic and Karanjit Sangira. Unless.
So
But-
Vic, I think when the request went into Vic, he was in India, so he didn't see it until quite late. I don't have one for vehicle crime. I can give you something anecdotal, but it wouldn't be.
No, that's fine. I mean,
wouldn't mean anything.
what the recommendation is that we bring this into another OSB meeting, a usual OSB meeting, not a crime and disorder one, later on in the year. So obviously we'll have to work with the democracy team and see if you can bring a report in then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Steve, what was your recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. The recommendation is that this committee requests that future plans and progress reports include KPIs and achievements against KPIs so that committee members can identify progress and shortcomings and put forward recommendations.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. That's seconded twice. Well, we'll take it with if no exception. So is everyone happy with the recommendation? Yep. Okay, thank you very much. That's passed. And that concludes the evening for today. Thank you very much.